bonuses they've had over the last few years, we would claw back off them and give them back to the ordinary people who've lost their savings and have lost the value of their shares in those companies. That's the first thing. No rewards for these giant crooks. They're lucky to escape without being put on trial. What we would then do is every time one of these goes to the wall, we wouldn't step in and save it with taxpayers' money. We'd wait until it goes to the wall and say, right, now the wreckage is the valuable wreckage. It's being taken into what is going to become a national reconstruction bank. And so we'd say to the people, say, who are living in a house, 3/4 owned or 120% owned by the wreckage of that building society, right, you stay in a house, you keep on paying your mortgage, but instead of it going into this bottomless pit in terms of giant handouts to the biggest shareholders, in terms of enormous bonuses to the chief execs, the money that you're paying off your mortgage, same as you were before, but it's going into the National Reconstruction Bank, where it's going to build up, it's going to accrue, so that there's large sums of money paid by our people to invest in things that we need to invest in. And then, at the same time, our government will be doing, it's not a socialist or communist system, it's actually a carbon copy of what the Japanese did. In 1945, Japan was a wasteland. Not one Japanese city was standing. 2 of them had been nuked. All the others had been firebombed. The Japanese had lost a higher proportion of their young men than we lost in the First World War. It was an utter disaster. The place was a howling wilderness. And the Japanese dusted themselves down and they said, right, how are we going to get out of that? And the government said, right, well, we'll tell you how. We're going to have financial houses and banks who are the servants of productive industry and of the government and of the people, instead of the other way around, which is the Anglo-Saxon model. We're not even the servants, we're the serfs, the indentured slaves of the bankers and all the rest of them, of the financiers. But the Japanese said, right, we're going to rebuild this place, and we acknowledge the need for capital and for capitalist competition, but it's going to be within boundaries. And the key boundary is that, the most important one, is that finance is there to serve the nation and not the other way around. And then they set about looking, from where we are now, what can we aim to be building in 5 years' time and making and selling in 5 years' time, which will then give us a springboard to go on and become more advanced. And they started with the really basic things, and then they got into cameras. And the British camera manufacturers and the American camera makers thought, oh, well, the Japanese are making cameras, are they? How interesting, how quaint. Didn't think any more of it. But what the Japanese were thinking of when they were building cameras, they were already thinking about the merger that was coming between electronics and cameras. So they started making video cameras. And the British and the Americans and the French thought, oh, how quaint, how very interesting, what a novelty. We'll carry on making big clunk cameras. And the Japanese just went straight past them until all the inventions, particularly from Britain, because this place produces still, even now, has done for the last 40 years, has produced more Nobel Prize winners in terms of real science and more real inventions and more worthwhile patents than any other country on earth for a head of population, streets ahead of them. We produce them. We invented the internet. We invented the computer. British people. We invent these things, and then foreign companies buy them up, or foreign industrial espionage operatives posing as Chinese students, postgraduate students, they steal the secrets, or the government gives them away. Gordon Brown's government gave away the core of the British defence industries research department, turned it into Kinetic, and the largest part of it, do you know, they sold the whole lot to the French, to a French state-owned operation, for less than the French got from one weapons patent when they started to develop it. All the rest thrown away. And that's why one of the reasons we don't have any real industry left in this country, because for 30, 40 or more years now, everything we've invented has been handed on a plate to assorted foreigners somewhere in the world, and they've developed it, and they've turned it into something which actually sells, and you can make money on, and thereby they've got the jobs, and we've got the dole queues, and people flipping burgers, and heritage museums. Everywhere you go in this country, you see a brown sign. You know, Museum of Lead, Museum of Shipbuilding, don't get those around Birmingham, of course. You know, Museum of this, that, and the other. What kind of country is it that only has museums? Remembering our heritage is all well and good. If you haven't been to the Black Country Museum, you haven't taken your kids or grandchildren to the Black Country Museum, get them there, because that's your heritage. It's your history. It's something to be really, really proud of. And the commitment and the suffering of the people who built this part of our country is really something astounding, and it's something that should be remembered and should be honoured. That's great. But it's no future for your kids if all you've got is brown signs pointing the way to museums. We've got to have real industries, producing real jobs and turning raw materials into valuable enough things so the rest of the world wants to buy them, to bring money in, so we can feed the people in what's now the most overcrowded country in Europe, bar Malta, which isn't really a country at all. You know, it's a little speck. This is a really country. We've got 60 million people in this country, and our land can only feed about 30 million. If we don't have manufacturing industry, what are we going to do? The Tories and the Labour Party said, doesn't matter. You've got the financial sector. They'll keep you going. Oh, great. Wonderful. Fantastic. Disastrous. So we would use the money that accrues, that builds up in the National Reconstruction Bank and say, right, now we're going to get into this new industry, do what the Japanese did. And we'll look at what industries are needed. Now, at present, we import all the widgets in the beer cans sold in Britain from China. And when we're in power, we would continue to import all the widgets sold in beer cans from China, because making widgets is a low profit, moronic operation which isn't going to go anywhere else. They're very small, they're very cheap to import. It's quite a dirty old business, all that plastic burning and so on and so forth. And making a widget doesn't allow you to do anything else. The skills required to make a widget aren't fit for anything else at all. Pointless. On the other hand, the Germans now produce 14% of their domestic electricity from solar panels. Now, Germany is no sunnier, really, than Britain is. Very, very similar climate. They've done that because they've identified that as one of the great growth industries of this century, because we've used half the oil and that's it. From now on, energy, once the economy picks up again, if it picks up again, it'll pick up for a little bit, but then it'll hit this glass ceiling all the time. There's not enough cheap energy to finance it anymore. It's finished. The carbon-based energy system it's not run out, but it's used the half, the easiest, the best stuff. From now on, it's in trouble. So from now on, alternative energy is the place to be. And the Germans have seen that. That's why they've decided they're going to specialise in that. Now, there's no need for us to copy them. We can either simply look, we can buy a couple of their solar panels, the very best ones they've got now, bring them back to our research universities and say, dissect that, make it more efficient, and we'll start producing those. And they've done all the hard work. It's what the Japanese have done to us for decades. There's no rocket science in working out that if your competitors do the difficult stuff, working out the initial parts to get something so it's actually worth making, they've done it all. All you've got to do is come along and copy it and find ways to improve it, and you're laughing, so we could do that. On the other hand, we don't just have to do that. Britain, despite decades of non-investment in serious university courses, despite decades of just throwing our manufacturing industry to the winds, by some quirk, Britain is still the world leader in deep wave power generation. Fantastic. This country is surrounded, as you know, by sea. We're surrounded all the way down the west coast. You've got nothing between us and the United States except sea and wind and energy building up. And we're better off placed to develop that than anywhere else in the world. First of all, to supply us with energy. And by the way, by the end of this month, if it starts to get cold, we're going to start seeing blackouts in all probability in this country, because decades of failure to invest in our energy industry, particularly the electricity industry, means that we now cannot even power ourselves. And one small blackout has a knock-on effect, or can have a knock-on effect, which leads to chaos and catastrophe lasting hours, if not days, because everything's so delicate and intertwined. Something goes wrong, poof, then there's a surge on another part of the power system, and that crashes, because power systems don't like those surges. Disastrous. So we'd say, right, all this money coming into the National Reconstruction Bank, we're no longer giving it to parasite bankers. It's going to go into developing, speeding up the development of our wave energy programme. And that means in the first instance that we stop being reliant on foreign gas, foreign electricity and so on. So we're better off in that regard.